When a visitor to our site completes the Suggest form with invalid data, like an email address in an invalid format, we now display the error message here above the form. But all the form fields are now blank. It will look to the site's visitors like we erased the values they submitted. That's not exactly what happened. Our code simply displays a blank form each time the page is requested. We have to make some effort to redisplay the values that the user submitted in the form fields. Let's do that now. If the request method was post, then we load the name, email address, and other fields into variables here. We can use these variables further down in the form. Let's scroll down to our form. Someone filling out our Suggest form would enter their name into this input field. The input element has 3 HTML attributes: type, ID, and name. There's another HTML attribute we can use to set the text that appears in the input field by default: value. For the value, we want to echo what is in the name variable. Remember, back at the top of the file, when the request method was post, we took the value from the posted field and loaded it into the name variable. This variable will only exist if we executed the code above when the request method was post, if we're handling a form submission. If we're just displaying a blank form, the variable will not be set. We should check first if the variable is set. If is set name. Let's copy this code and do the same thing for the next input elements. Changing name for email, changing name for title, and changing name for year. The Details field is a text area. The HTML for a text area is a little different. Text areas do not have value attributes. Instead, a text area has an opening and a closing tag. The default value is added as content in between the tags. Just like the other variables, we're going to want to check that this variable is set before we echo it. Let's copy just this much and change year to details. The last field type we have are the select boxes. These work a little differently. If we want to have a specific option selected by default, we need to use the keyword selected. Let's start with our category. Once again, we start with our conditional. But we also need a further check. If our category is set and our category equals our option value, which is books, then we're going to echo the keyword selected. There are 2 things to be careful of. Number 1, make sure your comparison matching the value is case sensitive. And 2, make sure there is at least 1 space before the keyword selected. Let's copy this code for the other 2 options. Changing out books for movies and books for music. We'll do this same thing for our other 2 select fields, format and genre. There's a lot of code, so I've included a file for you to download with the checks for these fields, but give it a try yourself first just so that you're sure you understand. Also, if you accepted my challenge earlier and set this up as a loop, it's a lot easier to make changes. I'm going to paste these changes in now. Let's take a look at this in the browser again. Let's start fresh on the suggest form. As each field loads, there's now code in place to check if it should have a value. On the first visit to the page, the request method is not post, so the whole block of code that handles the form submission and the code that sets up our variables gets skipped. So these variables are not set and the fields load blank. I'll fill in some data now, including the email in an invalid format. When I submit the form now, you'll see the error message, and all the values I entered into the form get preserved. The form is coming along nicely. Before we finish, I want to demonstrate a huge potential security hole and why escaping output is so important.